Good evening and welcome to St Mark's, Florence. I am very fortunate to be joined this evening by our Locum Chaplain, Dr. Nick Fisher, who is joining us here in Florence for hopefully the next 6 months. This is a great opportunity to get to know Nick as he begins his ministry here. And so let us begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So your early years, you started in a prep school where your parents taught just outside Birmingham. What could you to tell us about that and your link with a certain tower?
Well, it was actually more just in Birmingham. It was actually well in Birmingham. The prep school was perhaps about 1.5 miles from Birmingham city centre. But it was like a country environment because it was 20 acres of what was fields when I was growing up, and then it got turned into playing fields for the school. And so it was an idyllic existence really, and it was slightly in a valley, so it was really quiet, and it was like being in the country, and certainly you could smell the grass, and it wasn't just sort of city smells. And this particular tower was the tower, clock tower at Birmingham University, which is maybe half a mile away, and we could see it across the fields and across the trees of leafy Edgbaston. What was interesting, really, as I now discovered, was that it was based on the town hall tower in Siena. So I think that is perhaps an extra draw to Italy. I realised it, or didn't realise it. Italy was drawing me even then, but it's nice to be here and not far from Siena, although Florence is.
Of course, much better. Indeed, yes. So yes, your parents taught at the prep school that you were at, and so when you left there, where were you headed next?
I was taught by my parents at the school. My father taught Latin and Greek. My mother taught art. I was got more of an art-addled brain really, rather than my father's very sharp brain. And it didn't suit me, frankly, being taught by my parents, because members of staff would come to the house. We had a cottage in the grounds, and they were just like people, whereas obviously at school they're very important people, and I think I probably found it a bit difficult to relate to the two. So I started off well and then sort of sank a bit, and then decided I'd go off to the local day school, local grammar school. So there I went. It was fine. I had a lovely time. It was a brilliant school. Very humane headmaster who ran it, I subsequently discovered, on public school lines rather than any other lines, I suppose. But what was one of the really good things about him was that he had all the sixth form in the upper sixth in their last year. 2 periods before lunch on a Friday, he had all of us in the school library, and he would read to us poetry, extracts from plays. And it was a brilliant thing to do, particularly for scientists, but also for those of us who were on the upper sixth lit side and doing English A-level. It opened our minds brilliantly, and he certainly introduced me to the Welsh poet R.S. Thomas, who has been a great interest in my life and actually helped me understand life with poetry. So that's why poetry comes out a lot in what I think. And I think there's a good argument for poetry helping us to understand our theology, or theology helping us to understand our poetry as well. So I think there is a very clear link. So ended up there, grammar school, then left, decided I didn't want to go to Birmingham University and live at home. So I wouldn't say I went as far away as I could, but I ended up going up to Newcastle. I was on a recommendation from, actually from a professor of English, whose son and I both had the same piano teacher. When he knew I wanted to do English, he said we'd come round and have a chat. And then he said, well, we'll go up to Newcastle, small department, but very lively. And so I went up to Newcastle, read English, and it was a small department and very lively. Lovely time.
You mentioned the poetry coming through in your sermons. You have also, we see a bit of your mother's side, I suppose, through some of the artwork that you have mentioned as well. Do you, you say that theology and poetry possibly help each other out and go hand in hand. Do you think that's the same for the artwork? Do you think that the theology influences the art and vice versa?
Oh yes, I mean I think artwork and theology has always influenced art. I mean, there's some magnificent pictures in this room as well. One of the joys for me at Newcastle was we had to do a subsidiary subject in our first year. So that was for 2 terms. For me, I opted to do, actually I wasn't sure whether to learn Italian, I thought of it even then, or to do a history of Renaissance art and architecture course. And because the art school at Newcastle was good at that time, maybe still is, but it was good then, I opted to spend a couple of afternoons a week in a dim theatre, either looking at wonderful Renaissance pictures on the screen and hearing some expert talking about them, or an architect talking about the architecture of the Renaissance. And I do remember, obviously, Florence came up a great deal, not only the dome of the Duomo. No, it is the Duomo, I was suddenly thinking of the baptistry, that as well, but the dome of the Duomo, but also the palaces and things, Brunelleschi, and it was wonderful. So I think my mother's influence sort of came.
It was always there in the background. So upon going to university, had you arrived with any sort of preconceptions of a career that you might see? So studying English, had you had any advanced plans beyond that? Or was it still a discovery at the time? Well,
English prepares you for any career and no career. And I had gone up actually thinking that I'd teach. I'd loved school, brought up in school, it was in the blood, parents, teachers, etc., etc. But within a fortnight, it was quite peculiar. I could almost feel my eyes, my vision broadening. And within a fortnight, I decided that school wasn't for me, teaching wasn't for me. And we were told to go to the careers department within the first half term. And so I went there and we thought of this and that career, and they said, we thought of the Foreign Office, and I said, well, I had thought of the Foreign Office, but grammar school boy. They said, no, I think we'll just sort of person we want. Anyway, so I went along with that, quietly maturing, but then when it came to biting the bullet, as it were, I was, by this time, doing a second, I'd done a first degree in English, doing a second degree in English at Cardiff University, and thought, time's coming to an end, I must think of a job, and just happened to see in the Students' Union, and this is a great recommendation for students to go to the Students' Bar and spend time there, because I saw an advert for graduate entry to the police, and if I hadn't gone to the bar, I wouldn't have seen it, and I wouldn't have joined the police. Anyway, something clicked, and I joined the police, and had a full career of, ended up with 32 years.
During your time at Newcastle, you discovered the Earl of Rochester and his work. You then sort of have go on to have a sort of relationship over a number of years. So you could tell us a bit more about that. What was it that first sort of really got you involved with his work and that led you on to do your Masters and PhD in research?
I obviously went up to university a fairly innocent creature, and in my second year, my tutor just told me to go and write an essay on the Earl of Rochester Restoration period poet, and I discovered a bit wild, and certainly in his poetry, he used the B word, F word, C word, D word, and for a 19-20-year-old, I didn't think those words had been invented then. But he also wrote some brilliant satires. Two satires in particular are amongst the best of the period. And I thought this was an interesting person. He also wrote some very good love poetry with a twist. And I thought, fascinating. And I suppose it was the first time I'd been enthused by a poet to this extent. I also got frustrated at Newcastle in my second term, because that was when we did Shakespeare, and having spent the previous 2 years looking at one Shakespeare play in each year and spending the whole year looking at every word and seeing what that meant, to cover the whole of Shakespeare's works in a term and write an essay on the tragedies in one fortnight, the comedies in another, the tragic comedies in another, it just everything rushed by all very, very quickly, and I really wanted to dig deep into something and plough a furrow. And this Rochester came on the scene. There hadn't been a scholarly edition published until the year I went up to university. I don't think the two things were connected, but it did mean that there wasn't a pile of scholarly work behind you that you'd have to read if you were going to do research on, say, Shakespeare or Chaucer or anyone else, almost. So this was virgin territory. Virgin is probably an unfortunate word to use in the Rochester context, but it certainly meant that I could approach it with fresh eyes, unencumbered by history, and I've kept on doing that, I suppose, all my life, really. And it has been opened up some wonderful experiences. Graham Greene, the novelist, exactly 40 years before, he had written a biography of the Earl of Rochester called Lord Rochester's Monkey, and it's, I think, the most literate biography of any that I've seen. Perhaps apart from Boswell's Life of Johnson, but it's that quality. Wonderful, wonderful biography. Couldn't be published in the 1930s because of obscenity laws, or the publishers were worried about obscenity laws. But it did come out in the early 70s in a lovely edition with lots of very, very good pictures. And so my wife and young family went tramping through the Oxfordshire countryside, looking at places associated with Rochester, Wadham College, Oxford, Atterbury, Bodycote, and so on. And only later I discovered it was exactly 40 years, almost to the day, week, whatever, that Graham Greene had been doing that with his wife. So that was very, very nice and very satisfying. So it's, and I would say that for me, a university has been both a passport to work, but also a passport to leisure, and given me an interest there. And I also think writing a thesis isn't that different. It's rather longer than writing papers for court and so on. Amassing your evidence in a logical, clear way, which is exactly what you do, sweat over many years doing research.
So you started your masters researching Rochester at Cardiff, having followed your tutor from Newcastle down. You didn't complete it at Cardiff though, so you returned to Newcastle and...
Much later, yes. What happened was, I was at Cardiff, and it was job time came up, and then the more I thought about job time, I thought, actually, let's just get on with it and let's earn some money. So I left. It was a 2-year course. First year I had to be in residence. Second year I could finish off at home. And I thought, well, I'll just finish it off at home. Well, I joined the police and did finish it off at home, but it took me 15 years to finish it. I'm not a model student. But actually the good thing about that meant that I was juggling police work, having to do police exams, sergeant's exam, inspector's exam, criminology exam, things like that. So my brain, if you like, was still ticking along.
You were in a learning mode.
Yeah. And so then when, much later, I took a promotion from the police up to Greater Manchester, and was sort of a weekly boarder up in Manchester, coming home to Birmingham and the family at weekends. When I needed someone to fill my evenings, my thoughts naturally turned to carrying on research. Rochester, very good Rochester Restoration Period scholar at Leeds University, Paul Hammond, and I went along and saw him, and he agreed to take me on to do a doctorate there. So that kept me busy. I mean, yes, I mean, you hear stories of men when they're away from home being attracted by booze, television, or women, and all of those seemed either rather undesirable or risky. And research just gave me wonderful opportunity. It was about 40 minutes from north of Manchester, where I lived, over the mountains into Leeds, and you know, scholarliness and research.
So now going back, let's press the reset button to when you were younger again. Your early connection with the church. You mentioned that you're in a choir. Could you sort of expand about, tell us a bit more about your kind of early love for the church and your path in it?
Yes, well, church has always been a part of my life. It would be an exaggeration to say that there were about half a dozen, or I remember half a dozen clergy around my cradle, but there were a number of close relatives who were ordained. My father's elder brother was, for example, and nicely he baptised my 3 children later on. But yes, Sunday was always going to church. Then I joined the choir when I was of an age, so it was twice a Sunday at church. And then I was confirmed and thought, they asked me to become a server in church, and so I did, and then they asked about help administer the sacraments some years later, and I, for some reason, thought that I ought to get myself a bit more up to date with theology, and Diocese of Birmingham did a very good what they call a 3D course, or a foundation course for lay people, and you'd spend half a year, once a week, being lectured on the Old Testament by some scholar, ordained scholar, and second half on New Testament, and that whet my appetite for study. At the end of that year, I was asked, would I like to carry on studying and to be a reader, a lay reader. So I thought, well, yes, I could be more useful as a lay reader. As a lay reader, you could take service of morning prayer and evening prayer, you can preach, you can read the gospel and so on. And I thought, well, that could be useful for the church. So I did that, and did that for a number of years, probably about 17 years, and had no thought of being ordained. However, our bishop, the Bishop of Birmingham, whom I knew through the police, John Sentamu, who had chaired the Dan Lola Taylor murder inquiry, and the person I was working for, the HMI, I should say by this time, after doing a number of years in Manchester Police, I joined Police Inspectorate, Manchester Inspectorate Constabulary, and then got to know John Sentamu through that, because he and my boss, the former Chief Constable of West Mercia Police, had sat on the same review committee. Anyway, so I knew John Sentamu, and I was asked as a reader to hold his staff and look after his might, basically chaplain him during the service that he came to take. End of the service, we were chatting, and he asked me what I was going to do when I retired, because he knew that was coming up. And I said, I'm going to carry on my reader ministry in a rural parish. My great-grandfather had been a rural vicar, as in his father, and as his father. I think it was the record for the Church of England of a living being held by father, son and grandson over a period of about 125 years from the late 18th century to the First World War. Anyway, Bishop Sentamu said, no, I think you ought to be ordained. I said, no thank you. Did feel that my background in the police didn't really qualify me for that, but he said, no, I think you should. And I said, well, no, I don't. And he said, well, I think you should. And I said, look, I really don't think I should. Honestly, I'm not called for it. He said, come and see me. Phone up my secretary and let me see you next week or in a couple of weeks. So I went with some trepidation and anyway, got ironed out. And actually he's brilliant. Of course he said quite simply, we're all sinners, we're all hypocrites. So, what's your beef almost? And I felt if he saw this possibility, then I was happy to put myself through the BAP, whatever, I can't remember what that stands for. Bishop's Advisory Panel, and it was a 3-day thing, and they really grilled me, and they decide whether the bishop's right in thinking you might have a calling. Anyway, I got through that, and there we are.
Well, we got to this point.
Yes, I would say that I think probably many of us do. I think God has been an influence on my life and has guided my life, and I do feel that He is there. And yeah, so I'm happy to trust Him. And so coming here, when there was the sort of slight debacle at Heathrow Airport, when they decided I won't mention the airline, but it's an airline well known to the British people. They decided my papers weren't sufficient to get me into Italy and refused me access to the plane. So, I didn't think that was all right, but another solution provided itself, i.e. I went to the Alitalia desk and said, look, do these things. Are they all right? Oh yeah. Hop on, basically. So, and I did feel, because I did feel that I wasn't, may sound corny, but I did feel I was called to be here, and a way would be found to get me here. So it's just a matter of being a bit determined and not, fainting at the sight or falling over.
So, having been ordained to you, then I think you were in 5 parishes in Gloucestershire after that, and then when you came to retirement from the church back home, obviously, you decided that having already failed to retire the first time, you still weren't quite ready. So that's when you decided that to offer your services to the diocese in Europe.
Yes, that's right.
So where had you been prior to us? What was your other journey through Europe?
I went to theology college. That was in Birmingham, and then at the end of that, they decide where you'll go, or what diocese you'll join. I decided I didn't want to stay in Birmingham. I did want to. I felt called to rural ministry. This is where my great grandfather came into the picture, I suppose. And I also feel that the church in England does ignore rural ministry a bit, and I felt perfectly happy with the idea of going to country parish and just ministering people who just wanted a traditional church without too much angst. They still need to be moved along with perhaps new hymns, new ideas and things, but basically I didn't want to sort of, well, I felt I could offer them some sort of theological balm. So I said I wanted rural ministry, and the Dawson Director of Ordinance happened to be at a conference and happened to be sitting next to equivalents in the Gloucester and Herefordshire dioceses, and happened to mention that I was a possible thing. And they happened to say, oh, that would be interesting. So she then gave me their contact details. I phoned the Herefordshire one first because I thought of going to Hereford initially as a reader in retirement, and the DDO was on annual leave, so then I phoned Gloucestershire, and they said, oh yes, by all means come and see the bishop when you come back from your holiday. so I did, was accepted, and so operated in Gloucester, the Gloucester Diocese, as a curate in a place called Northleach, which is a big medieval church, centre of the wool trade, as I mentioned previously. And actually, there were connections between Northleach and Italy, which is another connection. But anyway, so I was a curate for 4 years there, and then given 5 parishes to look after. They were actually the adjoining parishes, which meant we didn't have to move house. So did that for 6 years, and then came to retirement age, and felt, well, I got a taste for not retiring, so I thought I'd give this one another whirl and not retire. And happened to meet Bishop David Hamid at an Oxford college where I was, well, I got membership of the Common Room, and we talked about places available in diocesan Europe, and he told me to get in touch, and so September 18 months ago I left one job, had a holiday, and then took up a couple of months in Tenerife. It was interesting, came home, all very nice, and then had a couple of weeks in Torrevieja in eastern Spain, which wasn't so nice because I was only there for a fortnight. Arrived on the Friday. On the Tuesday there was an annual parish meeting, or an emergency parish meeting, and they had been told that if they would keep the 7 churches in the chaplaincy open, then people had got to give more. Crisis point had been reached, and they were told, right, 4 of these churches are closing with immediate effect. So my 2 weeks there were ministering to, twice a Sunday to sobbing congregations almost, who, it's the last time we're going to be here. All rather sad, and it is painful when people's dreams just sort of vanish. So that wasn't so good. But an experience, and I suppose I was doing something that I had to do. Then coronavirus bit, and I had been due to go to Norway for a couple of weeks again. That was cancelled. But in July, I went for a couple of months to Hamburg, which was a brilliant experience. Came back, had about a month at home, and then had a couple of weeks in Mallorca. So long ago, just October, November, my memory's gone. So that was interesting. I have to say that I did Spanish A-level, and I had thought that operating in Torrevieja, Tenerife, Mallorca, it would be nice because I could use my Spanish. But in fact, the Spanish they spoke was nothing like the Spanish I had learned. And the treasurer actually at Tenerife, she was English, married to a Spaniard, and she had read French and Spanish at university. And she said she had to relearn Spanish because when she was speaking to her husband's family, they were saying, "What are you on about?" And so that was a big disappointment. And it rather put me off Spanish. I felt I'd been let down. All this hard work to do a Spanish A-level. And I had, at the end of my A-level course, I had spent some time in Greece, and then flown, with Crete in fact, and then flown in and had a week in Rome. And I felt it was just like coming home. Greece is just a different world in some ways, but Rome seemed wonderful. It's also places we know. And I was in St Peter's Square, and the Pope was, I knew the Pope was going to be speaking to somewhere. Of course, this tiny white figure, I didn't notice it at the window initially, but there were a couple of Italian nuns, and I spoke to them in Spanish. They understood me. They said, what's happening? Where's the Pope, and so on. And they spoke to me back in Italian. We got on fine, and so that encouraged me to think that I could actually, at some point, spend time in Italy and sort of half understand what was going on. The trick, of course, while I'm here is to make sure people understand me, but I'm trying my Italian. So that's a project for a quiet evening.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. It's been good to get to know you, and I'm sure the congregation will also appreciate getting to know you as the local chaplain. So, and I think we're all very much looking forward to coming up to Easter, and then obviously the months ahead. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for being a very sympathetic interviewer, and of course it's all good to introduce myself. I hope I haven't put anyone off, but I'm better in the flesh.
Marvellous. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Good night.